One of the greatest aspects of isometric training is how good they are for the joints. There's a reason why physical therapists tend to favor isometrics when they're working with a patient who's on the road to recovery. And it's important to understand the physics of acute musculoskeletal joint injuries, particularly strains, sprains, tears, and breaks, injuries that are effects of what's called Hooke's law. In physical therapy, Hooke's law has been defined as the strain is proportional to the stress producing it, so long as the strain is not too great, for once the so-called elastic limit is passed, injury occurs. Our muscles, tendons, and bones all possess that limit. When any type of force exceeds that limit, injury is the result. The level of injury is proportionate to that excess force. For example, spraining an ankle after jumping from too great a height, tearing a muscle from lifting a heavy weight, or breaking a bone after hitting another player in a contact sport. In all three of these cases, stress or force, which causes that injury, is due to two factors: load or momentum. When these forces pass that limit, that elastic limit of the athlete's tissues, injuries occur. And while the forces generated in isometric training are incredibly high, these forces are generated internally by the athlete's own contractions. There's no external load and no momentum. Did you know that human muscular contractions are actually capable of causing physical damage to oneself? There are tons of instances of individuals getting struck by lightning whose involuntary muscle contractions have been so strong from that stimulus, it was enough to literally break their own bone. However, in the case of voluntary muscular contractions, like in isometric training, the nervous system has created a highly protective, feedback-based fail-safe system, and this is known as cortical inhibition. Cortical inhibition automatically puts the brakes on muscle contraction before it reaches an unsafe level. Pushing as hard as we can on isometric exercises allow us to maximize our force production without exceeding our body's strain limit, preventing injury. When performing other types of resistance training like plyometrics or even regular weight training, we're not as well protected by cortical inhibition because although our body is going to do its best to keep working inside that strain limit, our nervous system isn't as in charge per se as it is with isometrics. The effect of momentum, gravity, altering leverage, and strength due to different ranges of motion all mean that the body can suddenly be caught by those excessive levels of force that it might not be able to handle. Take this isometric Zercher squat here and compare it to a gymnast or parkour practitioner landing a flip. In the first case, the forces on the knees are entirely dictated by the nervous system. In the second scenario, they're dictated by the athlete's mass, speed, and even that landing surface. If any of those three forces become excessive, there's no off switch. The damage is done. Another example is for us weightlifters who like to explode up a bar using momentum only to have it catch in the sticking point. With that momentum gone, the muscles alone might not be able to handle that load, and what happens? An injury. Not to say that those types of training methods are bad, obviously they've worked for decades now, but it's to explain why isometrics are such a low risk for acute injury. What could be better than knowing how safe this method is? How about a quick recovery time? One of the reasons why isometric training doesn't leave us so fatigued after a training session is down to a not so well known but well established little quirk of muscle energetics called the Fenn effect. The Fenn effect was discovered in 1920 by Wallace Osgood Fenn, who, as well as being chairman of the University of Rochester Physiology Department, is also head of the American Physiological Society. Fenn's work was in complex thermodynamics applied to muscle contractions. Essentially, Fenn proved that concentric muscle contractions require more energy, up to triple the energy, to produce significantly more internal heat than equivalent isometric muscle contractions. Now, over time, those physiologists came to realize that this effect has consequences to muscles on a cellular level. Take, for instance, energy utilization of dynamically trained muscles means that they not only burn up more intracellular resources, they also produce more waste buildup than statically trained muscles. We talked about ATP in previous videos. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, and that rate of ATP breakdown in moving muscle contraction is up to 3 times greater than that for isometric contractions. This is going to result in greatly increased production of metabolites like lactic acid, ADP, and chloride, among others. Also, Also, the waste products still have to be gradually removed by the system to keep the muscles functioning. What's awesome about the Fen effect, unique to isometrics, is that the dynamic contractions are more costly to the cellular environment of those muscles from a viewpoint of chemical energy, recovery of resources, and detoxification of waste buildup. This is why during an isometric training session, even when we're going really hard with very heavy loads, it usually leaves us feeling refreshed and ready to work out again in just a couple minutes compared to regular sessions with conventional dynamic lifts, which tend to cause immediate fatigue, and we need a couple hours to recover from an exercise session like that. CNS fatigue, or central nervous system fatigue, is a concept often discussed in the context of exercise physiology and sports science. It refers to the temporary decrease in the ability of the central nervous system, or CNS, to generate or sustain the neural impulses required to perform physical or mental tasks at an optimal level. In English, it's a state where the brain and spinal cord, which make up the central nervous system, become less efficient. It's like being in low power mode. CNS fatigue can come from quite a few different factors: intense physical activity, mental stress, sleep deprivation, overtraining, and dehydration, and poor nutrition. The symptoms of CNS fatigue can vary, but they often include feelings of tiredness, reduced coordination, diminished concentration, and a general sense of just feeling sluggish. It's important to note that CNS fatigue is usually temporary and can be addressed through rest, proper nutrition, hydration, and adequate recovery. Anyone engaged in physically demanding or mentally taxing activities should pay attention to their body's signals and take those steps to prevent or manage CNS fatigue so that we're performing optimally. The reason we talk about CNS fatigue right now is because overcoming isometric training can potentially trigger this more often or more severely than other methods, and here are the reasons why. First is the high neural demand. Overcoming isometrics require a high level of neural drive or recruitment of motor unit. When we're pushing or pulling against that immovable object, our nervous system has to activate a significant number of motor units to generate maximal force. This is going to place a huge demand on the central nervous system. We're exerting a lot of effort. This is maximal effort. OI typically involves maximal or near maximal efforts where we're trying to generate as much force as possible against that resistance. This level of effort can quickly fatigue the CNS. There's also the fact that there might be prolonged contractions. Holding a maximal effort for an extended period can lead to CNS fatigue as the nervous system continues to fire at a high rate to maintain that contraction. Also, in OI, there's no movement, so the tension and neural demand are sustained throughout the entire contraction. Let's keep in mind the limited recovery time. This might seem contradictory to what we just talked about with the Fen effect. Since overcoming isometrics are often performed at maximal intensity and require a high level of neural drive, it may necessitate longer recovery periods between sets or sessions to allow the CNS to recover fully. Failure to provide adequate recovery time can increase the likelihood of CNS fatigue. Part of why it's really important to make sure that the programming for these isometric sessions are on point. Lastly, different individuals might have varying levels of CNS fatigue tolerance. Some people may be more resilient and able to handle frequent and intense overcoming isometric training. Meanwhile, there might be others that experience CNS fatigue really easily. It just depends on the person. While this method of training is really effective for developing strength and power, it should still be used strategically and in moderation. It's all about the programming. And a reminder just to be mindful of the recovery and adjusting their training volume and intensity as needed to prevent this CNS fatigue from occurring. Proper periodization and recovery strategies are absolutely essential here. Now, once we learn to have the programming on point, we can take advantage of Hebb's rule, an awesome aspect of isometric training, which you can learn about right here.